Welcome to 18 TV, the channel where we discuss all things project management. I'm your host John Hyde, and today I'm talking to Damien Watson from Amido about hero delivery. So Damien, please tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? What are your special interests in the world of project management?
Well, thank you, John. Yes, I'm Damien Watson. I work for a company called Amido, which is a cloud IT consultancy. And personally, I've worked in and around and managed digital projects for around about 15 years within a variety of industries, particularly within the sort of digital application space. And my particular interests really these days, after some time in the project management world, are around what are the things that you do as a project manager that increase the likelihood of your project succeeding. Those are the most important things from my perspective that you should be focusing on.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a great sort of mission statement. Something that our viewers will resonate with our viewers, I'm sure. We're all, I think it's part of the project management psyche to be continually trying to think, how can we do this better next time and all that. So that's fantastic. Okay, so we're going to talk today for about probably 25 minutes on a subject called hero delivery. Now, do you want to tell us what you mean by hero delivery? Because this is something that you've brought to the show. So what is it?
Well, I think in short, I'm sure a lot of people who watch this will recognize this, is that it's a compulsion to do all of the work of the project as the project manager. Or in other words, a compulsion to save the day for everybody else, which for me presumes a couple of things. First of all, that the day actually needs saving. So it might mean that you perpetually view projects in crisis. And number two, really, that you're the only person that can save it. So you have to put on your cape and rush around like a crazy person, and actually, do everything to ensure that everybody else has a happy life and that the project succeeds.
Ah, yes, this is interesting. So, yeah, you say the compulsion to do the work of the project. Now, I can remember. This is something I've spoken to a few project managers. I remember sitting in a classroom on, I don't know, Agile project management once, and a guy from one of the big energy companies sat there and said to the group, "Oh, it's so important that I demonstrate my expertise to the team and that I lead from the front, and it's so important that I'm the best at all of the different disciplines within the project. I've got to be the best, because otherwise, why am I the leader?" And so this guy explained how he's sort of regularly getting stuck right in there, delivering the work of the team, and that started ringing alarm bells with me. So I know we're going to go on and talk about that in a minute, but just to further our definition, then, how might it manifest itself then in the project? If you've got a hero delivery scenario going on, what sort of things might that person exhibit?
I mean, there's a very obvious first one, which is getting in first and leaving last. So, you're in there preparing everything in the morning for everybody else. You're then spending the day with everybody, sitting on top of them, trying to make sure that they're doing the things that you think they should be. And then in the evening, you're wrapping it all up and doing all of the things that they didn't do. So I think that's definitely symptom number one. Symptom number two is perhaps an interesting one, in that I think it's quite, I think I've experienced this myself, that whilst you're going through a hero delivery phase, often you'll feel all alone and that it's only you that can actually deliver. And coupled with that will be a feeling that nobody's going to thank you for it. So it's almost a sense of martyrdom about it. You're doing it, you're putting yourself on the line for everybody else.
Yes. Okay. So yeah, that's really interesting. So we've basically got probably excessive hours. Um, so if you're in first, working with a team all day, out last, that sounds like a long day to me. Um, and then you say this issue about feeling the weight of the whole project on your shoulders. So taking it all upon yourself. And that's the sort of thing that we might see in a hero deliverer, or perhaps a
Yes.
Superman, that might be a better phrase for it. Yes. So we've got this concept then of hero delivery. The very first thing you said was it's a compulsion to do the work of the project. Now, we all know, we've been in project management a while. We know that project management involves a whole range of activity and responsibility. So getting stuck into the work of the project as well sounds like we're taking on more than one full-time job, perhaps, and hence the link to the long hours. So why don't we explore really what sort of issues that can create then? Because on the one hand, like this guy that was in the classroom I talked about earlier, this guy's saying, "Oh, I'm great because I can manage the project, and when the team gets stuck, I'm better than them all, so I can get stuck in there and do the work." So on the one hand, you might think, "Hey, this guy is a Superman, and what a great asset." But do we think that this can cause other issues? What do you think, Damien?
I guess the answer is yes. I wish I were him. On a project with 200 people and being better than everybody else, which is it's an interesting mentality around that one. But I think the most obvious problem this raises, first basic principle is that to overcome a challenge or to solve a problem, which is typically what a project's about, one person potentially could do it. But if you have a team of 20 working together are far more likely to do it. So going back to the idea that a project manager's role is to increase the likelihood of the project succeeding, then if you're working all alone and doing the work of others, you're actually reducing the chance. So what your role should be is to facilitate and enable the work that the team needs to do, and provide the communications and the planning around. I'm going to start this one again. Might have to do some editing later, John.
I think that's good, but I would add to that. I think looking forward is a big thing for the project manager, from my point of view. So the manager shouldn't necessarily be diving in on every little issue as the project's progressing, but they should constantly be horizon scanning and making sure that they're kind of using their crystal ball a bit and all their wisdom and experience to pick up on things that may go wrong in the future, and then to obviously try and head those off before they materialize. And it's all about kind of pathfinding almost for the team and making sure that they know the direction of the project. So if the PM's engaged in all of that, then constantly looking back and diving in and delivering the work of today, he's not going to have the same capacity to do the future scanning. And I think, I think that complements what you were saying about. Well, it ties in with what you were saying, as you said, planning, which is essentially what I'm talking about: planning and then heading stuff off.
Actually, that actually brings up an interesting point, which the term project management doesn't really cover. I think there's two elements. One is a leadership element, which I think you're talking about, which is looking forwards, seeing what's coming, and then providing the environment and direction to the project team to go towards that future. And the other part is management, which is about the day-to-day running of things. And for me, that's around the facilitation to the team, ensuring that they've got the right environment and tools to work within, and knowledge and connections to the people they need to be connected to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't suppose I've given it much thought before about that, getting the balance between the operational day-to-day management versus the leadership side of it, and that's certainly an interesting debate that perhaps we'll do another day. So, recapping on what issues does it create?
Yeah.
So as I say, we've defined it as in long hours, blah blah blah. Another thing that that perhaps we'll see in a hero, in a Superman, is a lack of delegation. Then an issue about not delegating the work down and doing the work instead. So what impact do you think that could have in a project scenario?
Yeah, so just quickly to talk about the team first of all, you could characterize a healthy project team as one that had mutual trust, good communications lines, felt responsible for the delivery of the project as a team. So when you have a hero delivery project manager, that the core thing for me that breaks is the trust with the team and the feeling of ownership. So if I were to sort of characterize this, if, for example, I was a software developer doing my work in the day, and then the project manager came in the evening and did a whole load of work for me and changed my stuff. I'm going to feel pretty much that what I'm doing is relatively worthless to the project, and I'm going to disengage pretty quickly. And then I'm not, if you roll that out across a whole team, you've got a whole team not really working together. And again, therefore reducing the likelihood that you'll succeed.
So, so a lack of delegation, and perhaps even worse than that. I mean, so delegation obviously is about giving the work out from prior to the work being commenced. But what you described there, Damien, is a PM coming in and polishing, totally editing, rewriting the work of the team member.
Yes.
And as you say, that creates a trust issue, and obviously we're talking about team morale now, because that team member, as you say, they're going to feel pretty. They're going to feel like, okay, so what I'm doing isn't good enough. And I guess if there's repeat behaviour there, perhaps the team member's going to conclude that it's not really worth trying very hard on the next task, because it's all going to get rewritten anyway. So I guess what that kind of culminates in then is an impact overall on team productivity.
Yes, and actually to take it up to a less extreme level, I think to answer it more accurately about delegation, I think if you're as a sort of in a leadership position, if you're not prepared to delegate, it does start to break trust, because you brought people into a project, or you've hired people into a company for a specific purpose, which is to do a thing. And if you are unable to delegate to them what they should be doing, they are going to feel, certainly at the least, put out.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the impact of the hero delivery mode on the team, but also it's going to have consequences, I think, for the project manager themselves. Have you got any thoughts on that, Damien?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, especially on a large project, or if you're handling multiple projects that are fairly sizable, very, very quickly going to burn out. And therefore your own effectiveness is going to be limited. I mean, certainly also there are times perhaps where this might be an appropriate way to go about things in a very, very short time burst. In some scenarios, but yeah, first and foremost, your own health and sanity, I think, are what are impacted. But also, I think something a bit broader around this mode of thinking or behaving can be quite addictive. So even if you're not in a hero delivery space, but if you're working very intensively for a period of time, when you get to a position where you don't need to do that and perhaps can go back to 9 to 5, it's very hard to do because you feel like you're not doing enough. So
absolutely,
it's quite seductive as a mindset.
So the burnout is something that that can be quite devastating, I think. Consistent long hours. I mean, the most obvious thing in the kind of build up to burnout. I mean, burnout is obviously the end of a long period of overworking. But even relatively short periods of hero delivery hours, so way beyond the 9 until 5, that can have, I think, quite serious consequences. Because I'm a really firm believer personally in working sensible hours, but really getting your head down and being as productive as you can in those hours, and maintaining a work-life balance. And the reason for that, I think, is those people working really long hours. If you're tired, you're inevitably going to start to make mistakes, and also just the way that you're able to respond to challenging situations. I think we all know if we're a bit tired, we've got slightly less resilience, and we're more prone perhaps to snapping and saying things that actually we wish we hadn't said, which all is going to pull us back to the impact on team morale that we've already talked about from another angle. So yeah, long hours, not good. So a key kind of characteristic of hero delivery, the long hours. I think that's something we want to avoid. Okay, so that really brings us on to a sort of the next part of what we're going to talk about, which is if hero delivery is such a negative thing, how can we see it? How do experience? Well, is it something that experienced project managers can get drawn into, or is it something perhaps that people new to project management tend to get sucked into? How do you see, Damien? How do you see people getting drawn into it?
I definitely think there's a degree of there's an experience angle to it. So if you watch a bunch of school children playing football, you see them all running around after the ball. Whereas if you watch a professional team, they're all spaced out around the pitch, they know their roles, they contribute where they need to. So certainly experience is an element of this. Sometimes the culture of the organisation that you're in will be an element to bear, or even your direct manager or sponsor of a project may expect to see you doing all of the work of people, and it's certainly a very difficult challenge, that one. But yeah, really, there's a number of different contexts where it might occur, but actually spotting it in yourself is a very important step, and then taking action and knowing what the things to do are to actually avoid this kind of pitfall.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you've raised a few possible causes there. I'm interested in what you say about the sponsor. I've certainly experienced a situation before where a relatively new, well, a fairly inexperienced sponsor just hasn't really got the understanding around project roles. And like you say, so then there can be perhaps a misplaced expectation that the project manager gets stuck in, and it's like, oh well, if you're not actually delivering the work, what are you contributing? It's like, oh, the project manager can't just sit up there in an ivory tower orchestrating and puppeteering. I expect you to be diving in there and delivering the work. So that's certainly something that resonates with me. I was thinking also, I think sometimes getting drawn into doing the work is a sign of the PM avoiding conflict.
Yep.
So, for example, it's quite a difficult issue to take on. If the team aren't actually performing and delivering the work that's been assigned to them, you've really got a few choices, haven't you? I mean, on the one hand, you can take them to task and take them to one side and have that sort of performance management stroke, just trying to understand what the issues are and try and help the person, or you may just shortcut that and think, oh, you know, I don't want to get involved in that kind of conversation, and I'm just going to do the work, and that'll be much quicker and easier. So, I mean, do you want to? I don't know if you've ever seen that sort of behaviour or and what the consequences are.
I call it holding the line, or covering the gap. Well, I mean, the consequences on you personally are obviously you're doing more work, and all of the kind of things we've already discussed. The consequences for the project are, well, essentially what's happening is that you're not being transparent about what's going on in the project, and that's upwards and within your team. So you're actually exposing the project to risk without articulating it anywhere, without communicating that. And so if that problem then becomes a real issue, you're putting yourself into a very awkward position where you've covered this up, tried to solve it and failed. So
yes.
it's not from my point of view, not a healthy way to proceed.
Absolutely. And I mean, I guess I'd caveat it with what you said before. I mean, in exceptional circumstances, sometimes it's the only way to get over a certain barrier. So it may happen, and it you know, on a one-off scenario, it may be okay. But as you also say, I think by diving in there, you do expose yourself to a lot of risk, personal risk, because the other thing is, if you start delivering the work of colleagues who ought to be, you know, it's their business, it's you know, it's their expertise. If you start doing it for them, you get into this whole, oh, it's John's project, you know, because John's doing it all, and that's not going to leave you in a good place when you try and hand over the product of the project to the business, because it's like, oh, well, you know, John did all this stuff 6 months ago, and it's doesn't meet our requirement at all. Actually, it's got, you know, we're not going to use this thing. So I think there's an element of that as well. Okay, so we've looked at, just to recap, we've defined hero delivery, we've looked at some of the issues that it creates, and we've now just kind of covered how people can get sucked into the mode of delivery. Did you have any final thoughts on, you know, the sort of scenarios that lead into hero delivery before we move on to the final step, which is about prevention and cure?
I think we've mostly covered the broad areas.
We talked about timing, didn't we? About project plan.
Yeah, and I think that comes into prevention as well. So I think one of the core, well, something that can really get you into a hero delivery mode is if you are behind plan. So this is especially true if you join a project mid-flight, and for whatever reason it might not be going well. Could even be going very smoothly, but you haven't, you know, had a proper induction to it, and you get behind plan, which means there's more work to do. It gets a bit intense, and so it's very easy to go into a mode of hero delivery thinking, and that's where you really need to stop. And it's a very easy thing to say, plan the work the plan.
Yes.
But it's very much true. The effort you spend planning is borne out when you come to execute the work.
Absolutely. Okay.
So, plan is rule number one, and plan realistically as well.
Fail to plan to fail. That's one of my favourites. Okay, so lastly then, to wrap this up, how can we avoid it then? We know that hero delivery is undesirable, especially if it's not just a one-off intervention. If you start getting sucked into a mode of hero delivery, so what can we do to avoid it? Would you say?
So certainly, well, first of all, the one we just discussed, planning.
Planning.
Make sure you understand sensible planning and realistic planning. Get your team involved with planning. So make sure your team is involved with all of the processes that you have to go through to run the project. So they're involved with your planning. They're involved with your communications around issues, risks, and all of that kind of stuff that you do as a PM. Be very, very clear where you do have problems. Call them out. Ensure that they are understood upwards where they're that important and within the team again. And learn to deal with conflict. So there are many different ways that you can approach conflict, but really the most effective is to actually confront the problem, which means unearthing it, understanding the problem, and not getting consensus on the approach to resolving it, but having open dialogue around that and continually monitoring and managing it as you go through.
Yeah, I think conflict resolution, you're absolutely right. Tackling it head on and doing it obviously in the right way, in the right environment, one-on-one. And there are all sorts of, I mean, that's a whole discussion, isn't it, on how to do it. But I do love the book, Crucial Conversations, if anybody wants to check that out. Brilliant. Okay, so we've basically covered it, haven't we? We've done definition, we've done what issues does it cause, and we've given a few ideas, hopefully, about how to prevent or cure it. Did you have any final prevention tips before we sign off?
Well, just perhaps a way perhaps to understand it for yourself, because I'm sure everybody in all walks of life can get into this mode of thinking. Ask yourself the question if you start getting the lycra out of the wardrobe. And ask yourself the question: in what way is this going to help me?
Yes.
What does it serve me? What does it give me? And then question that.
Okay, great stuff, Damien. Well, thanks ever so much for sharing your thoughts with us on 18TV today. Before we go, why don't you let our audience members know how they can connect with you?
Sure, I'm on LinkedIn. It's probably the best way, frankly. Under Damien Watson, so I think I've spelt my name correctly on this little thing here. So yeah, find me there. That'd be great.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thanks ever so much, Damien. Again, I'm John Hyde from 18TV. Thank you for joining, and until next time, goodbye.
Cool. Thank you, John. Cheers.